turn the time over to our new director here, Tara. I keep wanting to say, I'm sorry. Barling. And Tara's going to direct this. I'm kind of like Dale Pierce here. Dale has retired, and we're the same age, so it's only befitting if he retires, I have to retire too. So I won't be up in front of you very much anymore, but I'll still be around.
Yes.
And this lady will be directing us, and she has a very countenance of force, okay? So obey her. So I'll turn the time over to Tara.
Okay, thanks, Steve. All right. I am so thrilled to see all of you here tonight. So I don't know if it's Bliss and his wonderful topic of conspiracy. And finally, everything that the John Birch Society has been saying, 60 years, is now coming out mainstream media. So this is a pivotal moment for us. This is a time for us to not sit back on our laurels. Trump's in office. We have a tiny little window to get some things accomplished. Repeal, vacate, nullify things that were done the previous 100 years. So I'm asking you all to really just focus in and concentrate and join forces with like-minded people so that we can keep this train moving. This is not the time to doze off. So we were going to start with my chapters here tonight, and this is our chapter meeting as well. So all of you who are here, I have the books. We're doing a book club, the Doctrine of Lesser Magistrates, at the Nampa chapter, and soon we'll be booting up a Boise Meridian chapter as well. So those of you who are lost at sea, wishing you had a JDS meeting to go to, never fear, it's going to happen at the beginning of the year. So we're going to start off with a prayer like we always do, and then there is no flag here at City Hall. So this right here, hold up, and we'll do a Pledge of Allegiance. All right, let's bow our heads in prayer. Father in heaven, we come before you tonight with thanksgiving in our hearts. We glorify you, magnify you, and exalt you above every circumstance and situation that we face. According to your word, we acknowledge you in all of our ways, and your promise to us is that you will guide us in the direction that we need to go. Father, right now we need your direction, maybe more than we've ever needed it before. And so we humbly ask you for wisdom, again, according to your word in chapter 1 of James, that if we ask you for wisdom, that you will give it to us without reproach. And we thank you for that mercy, grace, and loving kindness on your part. Father, there are powers that we are dealing with and that we are trying to slay, for a better lack of term for me. And I ask you, Father, that the schemes and the plots that are being devised against the people that are not according to your will, Father, that they be pushed aside, vanquished, confounded, confused, ashamed, Father. That the angel of the Lord himself will push them along on a slippery path and blow them as chaff in the wind. That their plans will not take root, but in fact dry up at the root. Father, we bless your holy name and thank you that with you all things are possible. No weapon formed against us shall prosper. Every tongue that rises in accusation against us, Father, we do condemn. This is our heritage as servants of the Most High God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We bless you again, Father, and thank you, and ask you that you continue to empower and have us prosper and succeed in the endeavors that we are taking on this day. We pray all of this in the name that is above all names, in heaven and in earth, Yahushua HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ of Nazareth. And we say, so let it be said, so let it be done. Amen and amen. Amen. One more tiny thing I just wanted to say to everybody in this room. There is no word for coincidence in Hebrew. It is a mathematical equation. It coincides. It happens. It's not a fluke. It's not a mistake. It's not random. Each of us are here for such a time as this. Look at all the people in the Bible, the people that we want to speak to that you think of. King David, Solomon, Esther, Joshua, Caleb, Moses, Abraham, the list goes on, and that I want to speak to them one day. But one day, they may ask to speak to you because of what you've done at this time and this place. Not just for our country, but the peoples of the earth. So I just admonish you and encourage you and exhort each and every one of you to once again come together. Do not forsake the gathering, and come together. And let's reason this out, and let's save this republic. Here you go, Tom.
She does that to me every time she does that. Anybody's had any wonder why she was chosen as my chapter leader here in this area. My name is Tom Muntz, for those that don't know me. I am currently the Idaho coordinator for the John Birch Society. My territory has just been expanded to western Wyoming. I have the north-south corridor out in that area, so referrals are always welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm beyond humbled that so many of you took the opportunity to come in the midst of the history regarding conspiracy and being called conspiracy theorists and all of those kinds of things. I know that for some of you it might have been difficult to be able to do so. So hang on, this is going to be an awesome ride. I've been wanting Bliss to do this for a long time. This is not my opportunity to speak, so I'm going to turn it over to my boss and my friend Bliss too. Yeah.
I have coffee cards for those millennials that showed up. So you get a $5 coffee card. Oh, and thank you for coming.
Oh gosh, that's awesome.
I feel like a
Well, we better change your birth certificate.
Anyway, without further ado, you guys, Bliss too, he's become a friend of mine, in addition to my boss. I don't know how many of you are employed that can say that your boss is actually a friend. He's a tireless advocate for me, continually training to try to refine me and make me the kind of person that I really want to be. He's the head of 19 states, did I get that right this time? Traveling constantly, spending tireless hours away from home, and I'm just glad to be able to have him stand up and do this for us. And so, like I said, hang on for the ride, and everybody, Bliss too.
Well, that was a lovely prayer, and now I can't talk. Hit me hard. What I'm hoping is that you in the back of the room can hear me. We don't have a microphone tonight. And I don't know if my voice will last if I scream, but I'm going to talk pretty loud, so I hope you do. I am Bliss too. That's Bliss like Bliss, Idaho, or ignorance is bliss. Last name's Tube, T-E-W, like wet backwards. I've been with the John Birch Society this coming beginning of the year, 28 years as a volunteer member. And I've been on staff as a paid staff member in the field for 20 years, going on 21. So I was a chapter leader, a section leader over chapters as a volunteer. Then I was a coordinator for all of Utah, and much of Wyoming, and most of Nevada for some years. And I guess probably about the last 10 or 11 years I've been doing this. So I've been on the road. Like Tom says, I've got a 19-state region with coordinators that are paid staff members that help us build organization. It's key that we build organization, that we work in concert together to tell the truth and spread the truth. As Christ said, if you know the truth will make you free. And I like to say, if you don't know the truth, you're going to be deceived into bondage. Because those who intentionally lie to you have a purpose in that. You know, they intend to deceive you for a reason. I want to say just a little bit about the John Birch Society. We're a 60-year-old organization this year. We were formed in 1958 by Robert Welch, a remarkable, brilliant man. Most of us that have read and studied what he's written or said or just been written about him believe he was a genius. And I talked to a man the other night over in Spokane, Washington, and he was a 53-year member of the John Birch Society. He knew Robert Welch, and he told me one day he was sitting there, he was holding a 300-page book, and he said to Robert Welch, how long would it take you to read this book? And Robert Welch said, well, let's find out. And he took the book from him, and in 20 minutes he said, there, I've read it. Let me tell you what it says. And then he proceeded to just tell it and tell it and tell it. He had a photographic memory, but more than that, he could correlate the things that he read and learned, and he was a voracious reader. At our headquarters, we have about 22,000 volumes out of his personal library. An amazing man. He was one of the top leaders in NAM, the National Association of Manufacturers, and that's who he first impressed with his knowledge and wisdom, and they listened to him. Now, I put this book cover up here tonight. None dare call it conspiracy. This came out in 1970 by Gary Allen and with Larry Abraham. I read this book in 1970, and I still recommend it. Excellent book. And I found that people hardly believed me, but we sold, I mean the John Birch Society sold 5 million copies of this book. They even sold it in Europe. But I found as a young man, I think I was about 19 when I read it, that a lot of people wouldn't believe me when I'd talk about what were some of the contents in this book. And yet for me, somebody who loved history, this book put the puzzles together for me. I loved it. But I'm not going to spend any real time discussing this book. I'm just recommending it. And I chose the name of the title of the book as the title of my talk tonight. So what I'm going to do is relate kind of a story to you, and I'll start with this. I want to say that there's been a lot of talk since Donald Trump ran for president about the deep state. This is an issue of the John Birch Society's magazine, The New American, from January 8, 2018, called, no, I'm sorry, wrong one, I picked the wrong one, this is it, Deep State, okay? Pulling strings from behind the scenes, Deep State. So I want you to be aware of this magazine. We've got a few copies on the back. I think Tom said he'd sell them for $1 a piece tonight. So you've heard that term a lot, deep state. You've heard the term the swamp, those kind of terms. We've been talking about that for quite a while. The word that comes out a lot and that is ridiculed is conspiracy. And so that's where this talk comes from tonight. I'm going to tell a joke. And a lot of you in this room have heard this joke repeatedly. I tend to tell this joke often because it has 2 lessons in it. And so that's why I'm going to tell the joke, it's just because of the lessons. So if you know the joke, please don't tell anybody the punchline, okay? And when I'm done with the punchline, laugh. Well, there was a Navy captain, he had a battleship under him, he was coming into an eastern seaboard port, and it was foggy. It was so foggy you couldn't see ahead, except dimly through the fog there was some light. So he said to his radio man, get on the horn, call that ship up there, tell him to turn 5 degrees to port, right now. So radio man did. He came back in, he said, well, they radioed back and said, you better turn 5 degrees to starboard and do it right now. He says, you tell them I'm a U.S. Navy captain and I've got a battleship under me, and they're to turn 5 degrees to port. So he ran off, did it again, came back, he said, sir, he told me to tell you he's a seaman first class with the United States Coast Guard, and he has a lighthouse under him. So you better turn 5 degrees to starboard. He can't turn. Now the 2 lessons I'm talking about here are these. That captain of that battleship no doubt had a lot of education, a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge. But he wasn't seeing clearly what was ahead of him. He thought he was seeing another ship in the fog of reality. But it's really a lighthouse. So he had to quickly make a paradigm shift. when he learned the truth, didn't he? The other lesson is, it's not your rank that's important, it's the ground you stand on. Right? If you know the truth, it doesn't matter if you're a captain or a seaman first class. The truth is what matters. All right, so that's why I like to tell that joke. I think those are important lessons. I remember, well, I'll leave it there. Long time ago, when I first joined the John Birch Society, I got on a radio show talking to the man hosting the show. He was a section leader with the John Birch Society named Will Christensen. And I was talking with him, and finally he says, Bliss, there's a word you seem to be avoiding using. What is that word? And this would have been 1990, 91, somewhere in there. And I said, well, I guess I've been avoiding that word conspiracy. He says, well, why is that? And I says, well, people will call you a conspiracy theorist if you talk about conspiracy. And he says, but what is a conspiracy? So we discussed that. And I'm going to say it over and over tonight. A conspiracy is two or more people meeting in secret to plot to do something that's arguably evil. All right? So if Tom Munns and I come together and we meet in secret and we plan a birthday party for Dale Pierce, that's not evil. That's not a conspiracy. We're starting to form a network maybe, but not a conspiracy. But if Tara and I come together and we start discussing robbing a bank, now we have a conspiracy. Now we're conspiring to do something that's evil. Conspiracies are a fact of life all around us. People commit conspiracies a lot. And so let's talk a little bit about that. As a regional field director for the John Birch Society, I travel around, work with our coordinators in different places, and I was up in northern Idaho once, in Coeur d'Alene. And some of you might know her, I was working with Leah Southwell. She was our coordinator up there for western Montana, northern Idaho, eastern Washington. And we stopped for lunch at a big building up there, and she said, now, Bliss, we're meeting with a college professor, he's a history teacher. I don't want you to bring up conspiracy while we're with him because he'll ridicule you and make fun of it and call you a conspiracy theorist and all that. And I'm just trying to build a relationship with him and maybe we can get him to look at some of our information. I said, well, okay, I agree that I will not bring up the subject of conspiracy, but if he does, I won't shy away from him. So we went in, sat down, there he was, we sat down for lunch, and she introduced him to me, and then she introduced me as the regional field director for the John Birch Society for the Western United States. And he immediately said, oh, so you're the head conspiracy theorist for the Western United States. So I said, no, sir, actually I'm the head conspiracy factist. I'm all about facts, not just theory. He said, oh, brother, name one conspiracy that was political, criminal, that had any effect on history. I couldn't believe he said that to me, and I said, well, okay. Have you ever heard of a man named Jesus Christ? He says, well, of course. And I said, you know, when the apostle Judas Iscariot went and met with the chief priest and offered to sell him up for 30 pieces of silver, his Lord, his master, the man without sin, to deliver him to a kangaroo court, as it were, that was a conspiracy. When they took him before this chief priest, and they ridiculed him and made fun of him and slapped him and mistreated him and brought false witnesses. The false witnesses were conspirators with them. They didn't bear false witness just because they happened to be standing out in the hall. They were brought there. It was planned. It was determined what was going to be done. They took him over to see Herod. They returned him. They took him over to the Roman procurator, Pontius Pilate. And there, even when Pontius Pilate discovered that he had an innocent man and he wanted to to release him. They would not hear of it. And they put people together out in the crowd so that when he offered them Jesus or Barabbas, they called Barabbas. And he let Barabbas, a murderer and a terrorist, go. And he kept control of Jesus. He said, what shall I do with this man? And what did they say? This big crowd of people, they had people out in there to yell, crucify him. They all yelled that in unison. Was that a coincidence? Come on, professor, was it a coincidence? Heck no. This was plotted and planned. It was a conspiracy to utilize the power of government to murder an innocent man on the cross. That's what they did. He said, oh, brother, you got to go back 20 centuries to find a conspiracy to tell me about. And I said, well, let's go back 21 centuries. Okay. Oh, my. I'm straying. I'm all over the place. What is a conspiracy? I talked to you about that. You can see these mobsters here, but here's Jesus with the, the chief priest. So I'm going to go to this one. I said, so let's go back to 44 BC. And you've all heard of Julius Caesar. I asked him, I said, you've heard of Julius Caesar, right? And he says, yes. And I said, do you think that when Julius Caesar came and was under the statue of Pompeii on the Ides of March in 44 BC, when all of these Roman senators gathered together and drew their swords and their knives and began to stab him to death, that was a coincidence? I said, Professor, did they just happen to be there all at the same time with their swords and start stabbing him? Or had they planned that in secret to do that and to meet at that time and at that place for the purpose of committing an assassination? I said, if you don't know it, that was a political assassination. That was done for a political purpose, that they murdered him, but it was still murder. It was still evil to commit murder, and they still conspired to do it. And he says, okay, well, I can admit that, a long time ago something like that happened, and I said, okay, well, let's talk about another one. I'm going to just come forward a little ways, a couple of centuries. I don't have a slide for this one. How many of you in here have heard of the Roman Senator Catiline? One. Okay, good. One's good. Catiline was a very handsome, very erudite, very articulate, well-trained, wealthy individual in Rome. And at the time, he was also a very evil man. He had gone to Greece and he had trained in oratory there in Greece at the same school that Senator Cicero, the famous Senator Cicero, had trained. And so they were both great orators. But the difference was that Cicero loved the Roman Republic and the tablets of law. That was their constitution. And Cicero wanted to see the Roman Republic continue. On the other hand, Catiline wanted to become an emperor. And he had a plan for that. And he began to build a conspiracy among the seedier elements of Rome, but also going out in the surrounding areas to some of the vassal kings that had been conquered and saying, you need to join my plot so that we can overthrow Rome and make me the emperor, and I'll give you all that you need, and all the regular kinds of promises that a conspirator gives. Well, one of these men that were vassals that heard this plot told Cicero, the Roman senator, about it. And Cicero went to the Senate. And while Catiline was sitting in the same room with him, he told the senators, I've uncovered a conspiracy to overthrow the Roman Republic. And Senator Catiline is the one that's put this together. And Catiline got up and ran out of the room. Within a few days, he showed up with an army. Sure enough, Cicero had uncovered a conspiracy, a political conspiracy, to take over the Roman Empire by force and create an emperor at the head rather than the Roman Senate. And there was a battle that ensued, and by the end of the battle, Catlin and 20,000 men were dead on the battlefield. So this was a pretty costly thing, this conspiracy, this political conspiracy. Have you heard of that, Professor? Well, yeah, I guess I did hear about that. I said, oh, so there is such a thing as conspiracy fact, then, isn't there? It isn't just conspiracy theory, is it? He says, well, we're way back there in history. I said, well, let's come forward a few centuries. How many of you know her? Probably seen pictures of her before. This is Kali Ma. You can see she has several sets of arms. Sometimes she's depicted with 4 sets. Here she's got 5 sets of arms. Holds a head, bow and arrow, scimitar. This right here, it looks like a halo. What it really is what's called a ramal. Ramal. A ramal is a piece of silk about this long, yellow and white. That's what certain people use to strangle their victims with. This is the goddess Shiva that she's killed. You notice the necklace of skulls and here, arms around. Kali Ma is the goddess of destruction. She's a Hindu goddess. If you went back to the 1830s, there was a British lieutenant that was stationed in India. He just loved India. So before he ever left Great Britain, he learned to speak Hindu. He learned to read Sanskrit. He talked to every man that ever came back, to Britain from India. He wanted to know all about it. So he was kind of an expert when he arrived. And there's a book called The Stranglers. I bought the last copy Amazon had, so you're out of luck. Sorry. They might have one now. Great book, but it tells the history of an organization that worshipped Kali Ma. Kali. There's a lot of differences of opinion how long this cult had been in existence. Some say as long as 2,000 years. Most think it was about 600 years. Now, this cult had a name for themselves. They weren't just the cult of Kali. They called themselves the Thuggies. That's where we get the word thug from, is the Thuggies. When I told my father this story of 20, 30 years ago, well, it had to be about 20, I guess. I said, do you remember that old movie with Cary Grant in it, Gunga Din? That was about this cult, the cult of Kali Ma, the Thuggies. Now, the Thuggies numbered somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40,000 people that were joined together in this cult. This was in India. Have you heard of that, Professor? He said, no, I've never heard of this. I said, well, this is another fact of history that proves that conspiracies aren't a theory, they're a fact. Mr. Schliemann he read an article. Oh boy, I'm going to go too long. I gotta get with him here. He read an article, and it had been written by another British officer who had determined that he believed that the nearly 40,000 people a year that were missing on the highways and the rivers of India were not missing because of demons, but because the cult of Kali was murdering them. The Thuggies. The thugs. And so he began to do some investigating on his own. And he finally found that there was about 6 people missing from a little group that had just left their town and never showed up where they were supposed to be. And he questioned some people that had been seen around them. And lo and behold, he discovered one of them and tripped him up, got him to mess up, and revealed that, oh yeah, I was involved. So he did a little more digging, and he finally got this guy to take him out and show him where the bodies were buried. And this was the first breakthrough in discovering this cult's murderous activities. They used the Ramal, and it was very clever. I'm going to give you a quick story on how they operated for 600 years. This is one example. They would have, say, a banker out here in this community would say, I just helped finance a caravan that's going to be bringing silk, ivory, pearls, gold. They're gonna be moving down this particular road on this date, and I get a cut. I get a cut in the profits for what you're gonna do. And the Thuggees then would show up as their own caravan, riding their beautiful horses, their elephants, looking like the prosperous merchants that they were. And they would come up and they would meet as two pathsmen. And everybody would grab their swords like they were afraid of each other because the highways were dangerous. 40,000 people a year went missing. And they would grab their swords and the Thuggees would talk to them, look, we're peaceful men like you. What if, these are dangerous highways, let's travel together. And our numbers will make us more fearsome. We're all armed. And within about 2 days' march, they would make friends. They would be telling each other about their families. And finally one night, when most of the caravan that was to be victimized were asleep in their tents, they'd be sitting around the campfire with one of these victims, and they'd have a guy over here, and a guy over here, and a guy here, and this guy would say, look at the hawk by the moon. And when this man looked up, a guy behind him put a rumal around his neck, while the other guys grabbed his arms and legs and threw him in the dirt, and then they strangled him. This was the thing they took great pleasure in, is that they could fool their victims so much that their victims became their friends before they murdered them in cold blood. And then they would break up their bones, throw them in a burial pit that they had pre-dug the day before, and rob everything they owned and take it and sell it in their own marketplaces and look like the most successful businessmen around. They would also split the take with the local prince. So this conspiracy was between some of the people in banking, government, merchants, and so on. There were Muslims and Hindus involved. Isn't that odd? But we're all in this cult. So by the time Lieutenant Sleeman got done, he was General Sleeman. He had managed to arrest some 30,000 Thuggees. Many of them were tried, convicted, and hung. Others were tried, convicted, and put into prison or into new work schools to train them with new vocations. To them, this was a vocation. It was a religion and a vocation. They felt no guilt about what they were doing. They'd been doing it. It was passed down from generation to generation. So this was a transgenerational conspiracy, a murder conspiracy. So the professor says, well, okay, I can see that's a conspiracy. I said, well, let's come forward a little bit. Let's come forward to May 1st, 1776. And most of you have heard of this. Now, if you went to school in Europe, you would learn about this in your classes. I talked to a young man at Brigham Young University that was a foreign student from France. And when I talked to him about the Order of the Illuminati, he knew all about it. He said, oh yeah, we learned all about this in high school. So this wasn't seen as a conspiracy theory in France. It's just common knowledge. But here in America, when you talk about the Order of the Illuminati, the media will treat you like you're some kind of guy wearing a tinfoil hat that hasn't taken his meds yet. You know?
Right.
And that's the way they'll characterize you, even though your scholarship may be much better than theirs on this topic. Well, there was a man, he was a canon law professor at Ingolstadt University in Bavaria in the 1700s, and he was also a member of Freemasonry and so on, but there were many factions of conspiratorial designs at that time. And he put some of those people together in an order that he called the Order of the Illuminati. He, being the top man, he called himself Rex, like a king. And others would be, Spartacus and different names below him in the order. Each level of the order only knew their order and the one above. 2 levels down didn't know who was the 2 levels above them. So it was a very secretive order, and it was a conspiracy with a design. Their design was that they wanted to overthrow all of the political orders of Europe and create one world order, a new world order. They also wanted to get rid of religion. They wanted to do away with Christianity. They wanted to do away with the church, the family, morality. And they sent one of their couriers on a ride one night. His saddlebags were full of letters about their business, about what they were doing. And as God would have it, lightning struck him and his horse and killed him. And so when the Bavarian police came and emptied out his saddlebags, who is this man, they found all this evidence of a conspiracy to overthrow the governments of Europe, including theirs. And so they really looked into it. They went and made some arrests of some of the people that they were able to identify from the information in the saddlebag. They got admissions, confessions. These people all agreed eventually to disband their order of the Illuminati, which was a lie. Their infection spread to France, into the Jacobian clubs, as they were called. The Duc d'Orléans, you can read about them. They started a process in France to bring about a revolution and overthrow the king. Back on the back table, we have this 1996 special issue of the New American Magazine from the John Birch Society. And I bring this up because this is pretty special. That's a pretty old magazine for us to have a supply of them. But I'm recommending this to you. How much are you asking for this?
You know, they just, I didn't expect this kind of turnout. I was just gonna give them out for anybody that wanted them, but,
All right.
I do have 4 cases at home, so if you guys want.
Okay, so don't take more than one copy, but in this magazine, you can read all about this conspiracy and how they brought about the French Revolution, where the guillotine was used so freely. And they killed hundreds of thousands of Christians. They were maniacal. They were kind of the forerunners to the communists. They were the order of the Illuminati and the Jacobins. Their clubs, their Jacobin club, their influence came to America in the late 1700s. There was a book written about them. Because of all these papers and the court hearings and everything that happened in Bavaria, they had enough information. There was a professor up in Scotland, thank you, by the name of Robison. And he wrote an entire book on this called Proofs of a Conspiracy. George Washington read the book. He knew about the conspiracy. He was experiencing it. He was actually chased in Philadelphia at one time. There was a crowd of 10,000 people seeking him to murder him because the Jacobins had come into Philadelphia, New Orleans, and had been at work in America to subvert us after our war for independence. And I'm not going to go into all that, but you can read that story. So what I don't cover tonight, you can get a lot of deeper information here. There's a bibliography in the back of this that will put you onto a lot of books. It's on blue pages. It's called Conspiracy for Global Control, because that's what we're talking about overall, a master conspiracy. Right here on the Order of the Illuminati, there's a book called Fire in the Minds of Men, The Origins of the Revolutionary Faith. This was written by James H. Billington. Billington was the librarian for the Library of Congress. He was an incredible scholar. A long book, but so if you want to get into some real depth, there's books that you can get into. There was a Catholic father, what's his name? He wrote a book back in the 70s called Conspiracy Against God and Man. Dale, would you know the name? His name?
Bradley Burrill?
No. Anyway, you could read that book. You bring up Abbé Buriel, and he wrote a great big thick tome on this topic. So if you want to get into that deep, you can. Anyway, the professor was aware of the Order of the Illuminati. He smiled, kind of condescending, acted like, gee, that was disbanded. There's nothing to worry about there, except that you see, when you read the book by Robison, you find the language in the book is the language you find in international communism. because the Order of the Illuminati gave birth to other organized efforts to move forward the conspiracy's aims. One was called the Carbonari, and the other is called International Communism. Now remember, I'm talking about 1776. It's not that much further down the road where you see Karl Marx write the Communist Manifesto. That was 1848. So Karl Marx again, this dissolute college professor, there once was a man named Gesser. His knowledge grew lesser and lesser. It soon grew so small he knew nothing at all, and they made him a college professor. Anyway, he was a college professor, and I'm not trying to denigrate college professors. A lot of them are brilliant people and have great education. I'm just trying to make you laugh. But anyway, he was asked by the League of the Just, or there was another term for it, but he was asked to put together a compendium or a compilation of the socialist ideas that their organizations were working on. And so he put it together, and it's called the Communist Manifesto. I was going to bring a copy tonight, I didn't. If you haven't read that, I recommend it. It's only about this thick. It won't take you very long. You'll be horrified at the content of this revolutionary manifesto that wants to do away with the family, do away with God, wants to do away with all the governments of the world and create their own government over the world. And it wants to do away with private property ownership. It's a frightening idea. And of course we saw it later manifested in Russia in 1917. And then it moved forward into as many as 45 countries in the 20th century. And what was the count of bodies that we could lay at his feet? Now, granted, he was just the representative of an already existing conspiracy, a secret combination all across Europe already. But if you look, there's a book called The Black Book of Communism I'll recommend to you. It was written by 6 French professors, The Black Book of Communism. And it was written after the fall of the Soviet Union. They were actually allowed to go look at the archives of the Soviet Union in Moscow. And these 6 liberal professors came back and they weren't liberal anymore. They wrote a book to expose what this international, what they said was a criminal conspiracy, had done across the globe in the time that since they had taken control of Russia. And the blood count that they list in the front of the book is 110 million murdered people. Outside of war. This is during peacetime. So when we're worried about 20 students killed in a massacre in a school, we have a right to be worried about that and them. But compared to 110 million murdered people, we have a much greater threat than one madman that stole a gun. Don't we? 110 million people. 70 million of those murdered were murdered by Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao, in China. His goal was to rule the world. He got to rule about 1/5 of it. That's not too bad for one megalomaniac communist. Stalin helped him along. Lenin, Stalin, some of the, these were horrific pinnacles of an oligarchical conspiracy to control mankind. All right, well, so he had to admit that yes, communism's existed, but now communism's dead, he said. Well, I said, have you told that to the billion people living in China under the Communist Politburo's rule? Have you told that to the people in Vietnam? Have you told that to the people in North Vietnam? Have you told that to the people in Venezuela? Did they believe you? Be news to them. They're under the control of communists. So that's just not true. Let's go forward a little bit. Well, there's a Communist Manifesto. Okay, I said to him, Professor, let's come forward a little bit. That's 1848 to present, this communist dynamic. I have another conspiracy to tell you about. I said, have you ever heard of the Wannsee conspiracy? I can see some smiles. And he said, no. And I said, well, I think you have. You just haven't heard it by that name. But let me tell you about that one. This occurred in the Wannsee suburbs of Berlin. And there was a big mansion there that had been owned by a Jewish family that had been taken over by the National Socialist Workers' Party, the Nazis. National Socialists for short. I always love it that people call them right-wing, but they're socialists. So how does that work on the political spectrum? Let's see, if we've got communists over here on the left that are socialists, and then you put Nazis over here on the right that are socialists, how is that opposites on a spectrum? It's not, is it? So a proper spectrum has to be opposites, like black and white, cold and hot, and warm in the middle, right? Gray in the middle. There's a spectrum of gradation between opposites. Moral and immoral, right? A lover of life, a murderer. There's a spectrum somewhere in there. And so a proper spectrum would say over on the left, total government, totalitarian government, 100% government. What fits over there? The Nazis, the communists, the emperors and potentates and others that would oppress you and rule you and murder you and steal your property, right? Total government. What's over here on the far right? It's the opposite of total government. No government. This is anarchy over here. No government. That's just as bad almost as the total government, because you got anarchy, and anarchy is a condition without government. Well, what do the criminals do when there's no government? So where are we in the John Birch Society? We're over here in the middle. We don't want no government. We don't like anarchy. We don't want totalitarian government. What we want is what the Founding Fathers gave us. And that is constitutionally limited government, limited to the proper roles assigned to government by that Constitution under the Declaration of Independence principles. Okay, so that's where we are. We're called extremists a lot of the time. But that's because we're extremely in favor of freedom. We're extremely in favor of limited government, not unlimited government. When you've got unlimited government, then you have tyranny and oppression, don't you? So the founders knew that. They sought to limit government to a few specific tasks, a few specific powers that they enumerated in Article 1, Section 8 for the Congress. All right, well, I'm going kind of long. Let's move along here. So the Wannsee conspiracy, what is that, Professor? Well, he didn't know. I said, well, they brought ministers, all the ministerial level people from the government of the National Socialists together in this beautiful mansion. You can get a movie on this. Maybe find it on Netflix. There's two versions. There's a European version and an American version. The Wannsee conspiracy, W-A-N-S-E-E. I recommend the European one. It's in German with English subtitles, but it's better. Either one, though, will give you the story. But what did they plan there? It was something arguably evil. It was planned in secret. It was the plan for what they called the final solution. They planned the mass murder of every Jew in Europe and Russia. And they managed to kill 6 or 7 million. So they carried out their conspiracy through the power of misused power of government. Right? Instead of government protecting people's rights, government became a power for violating their rights, their property, their lives. So that was a conspiracy, a government conspiracy, wasn't it, Professor? He had to admit, yes, that would have to fit now. I said, okay, well, there's a lot of conspiracies. There's a lot of conspiracies out there. How many of you recognize this man? Anybody know him?
Joseph Valachi.
Ah, there you go, Joseph Valachi. Now, you see how he's got his hands cupped here? He's got a piece of crumpled paper in this. This is about 1962, probably. He's testifying before a Senate subcommittee on organized crime. Joseph Valachi had been in prison for a while, and in prison, he knew there was a head out on him, and he killed a man that turned out to be the wrong man. He thought this guy was coming to kill him, and he hit him with a lead pipe and killed him. And so, in order to avoid the electric chair, he said, look, I'll rap on our organization, right? I'm gonna tell the history of it to you. So he began to talk to the investigators in the FBI. And this is him now, months later, sitting at this Senate subcommittee, and he's telling them about the oath that he had to take in organized crime. He crumples up this paper. He said, they put a piece of paper crumpled up in my hands, and they lit it on fire and said, if you tell what we're telling you today, if you tell anything about our organization to anyone outside our organization, you'll burn like that paper burning in your hands. They took a switchblade and cut his finger and said, if you tell what we're telling you today, we'll cut your throat. They slapped a revolver in front of him and said, we'll shoot you if you break this oath of America with us today. And he said, but that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to tell you the name of this organization. And up until then, America didn't know the name. They thought of it as syndicates, criminal syndicates in various cities, New York, Philadelphia, LA, New Orleans. These were separate criminal syndicates, or maybe the mafia or the Black Hand. But the real name they had never heard until that moment. And that name you've all heard 1,000 times on movies now. That name is La Cosa Nostra. That means this thing of ours, La Cosa Nostra. And then he began to spell out, here's the 5 families of New York, here's their heads, here's how they're ranked, all the different lieutenants and capos and everything through their organization. Here's how they corrupt senators and judges and so on to help their criminal syndicate. And it is transcontinental. You can find this in Sicily, you can find it in France, you can find it in Italy, and you can find it in the United States. So it's a transcontinental, and it's transgenerational. This is a conspiracy that's been around for decades and decades, even centuries. So people that say, well, you can't keep a secret like that, aren't absolutely right, are they? They kept the secret for a long time. They do it by blood oath, where they threaten to kill the participants. So I know this is kind of bleak information, but I'm just showing you that it's true. This is a book about a great man by the name of Delmar Dennis, who grew up in the South. He was a preacher, and he was invited to join the Ku Klux Klan. He didn't really know what they were. He heard they were a good group of people that were doing some civil good, and he went to their meeting, and he felt like he was tricked. But he joined with an idea in mind. And they had an oath, and they had threats. But he helped the FBI solve a series of civil rights murders. And these civil rights murders were the murder of 4 civil rights workers, and he helped uncover where the bodies were buried of these civil rights murders. Well, the Ku Klux Klan, of course, was a long-time conspiracy in the United States that did some pretty wicked things, including those murders. And there were senators in the U.S. government that were members of the Ku Klux Klan. So sometimes things like this even work into government. Now I want to read this. You can read it. I hope you can all see that. But this is a quote from Abraham Lincoln in 1858. So this is 3 years before our great war between the states, our Civil War, that killed 650,000 combatants and probably cost the lives of an estimated 1 million civilians in a country with a population at that time of about 35 million people. So this was a hugely devastating war, destructive to our economy, destructive to the brotherhood of states that had existed. And it didn't come around and happen by accident. And I'll recommend another book to you if you want to get real deep into some of the organizations that were behind fomenting the Civil War. There again, the Carbonari was partly at the root of this, because out of war comes some of their aims. One of their aims is the growth of government and government power. And so the Civil War brought about a great centralization of powers. But anyway, let's read this together. Abraham Lincoln in his House Divided speech. But when we see a lot of framed timbers, different portions of which we know have been gotten out at different times and places and by different workmen, Stephen, Franklin, Roger, and James, for instance, and when we see these timbers joined together, they exactly make the frame of a house or a mill, all the tenons and mortises exactly fitting, and all the lengths and proportions of the different pieces exactly adapted to their respective places, and not a piece too many or too few, not omitting even scaffolding, or if a single piece be lacking, we can see the place in the frame exactly fitted and prepared, yet to bring such a piece in. And in such a case, we find it impossible not to believe that Stephen and Franklin and Roger and James all understood one another from the beginning, and all worked upon a common plan or draft drawn up before the first lick was struck. So part of what he's saying here is when you can see evidence and a pattern that men are working together to achieve something, believe the evidence. You know, it's right there to see. Conspiracy shows patterns. And oddly enough, members say things that tell you they are. This is a quote from 1913 from President Woodrow Wilson. Some of the biggest men in the U.S. in the field of commerce and manufacturing are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so settled, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. It's a long time ago now. Here's 1922. This is New York City Mayor John F. Hyland. The real menace in our republic, notice he doesn't call us a democracy. He actually knows we're a republic. The real menace of our republic is this invisible government. And what do we call it today? The deep state, right? Is this invisible government that, which like a giant octopus sprawls its slimy length over city, state, and nation. Like the octopus of real life, it operates under cover of a self-created screen. At the head, in other words, they try to be hidden and secret in what they do. They don't want to be exposed and known. At the head of the octopus are the Rockefeller Standard Oil interests and a small group of powerful banking houses, generally referred to as international bankers. The little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both political parties. Now this is the quote I really love, because this is David Rockefeller, the late David Rockefeller, but he was the president at one time of the Council on Foreign Relations. His family gave the land on the East River for the building of the United Nations headquarters. His family have been not only powerfully rich, but they've also been heavily involved in government. You might remember Nelson Rockefeller was governor of New York. He was vice president of the United States. He would have been president if Ford had dripped and dodged a bullet. Anyway, here it is. Some even believe, now this, let me tell you, this is in his book, Memoirs. He published this in 2002. It's about page 405. So if you want to get his book, you'll find this quote in his book in print. He was alive when this was written. This is his memoirs. He wasn't afraid to say this in public because he felt like he was untouchable. Some even believe we, meaning his family, we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. Okay, so this isn't some street thug. This isn't some mafioso. This is a man with a high-level education, a great deal of wealth, businesses, and so on, that is conspiring with others. And if you look at the membership of some of the organizations to which he belonged, you look at the Bilderberger Group, that's named after the Bilderberger Hotel. You look at the Council on Foreign Relations, 4,000 members. You look at the Trilateral Commission that he helped form. You find out that there's mega elites in government, in education, in multinational corporations, and so on, that are linked together in this. And furthermore, you know, they cooperate a lot of times with international communists. So there's a linkage there. And people used to say, well, how can that be? How can, you know, multinational corporate leaders that are, what do you call them? You know, they believe in capitalism. How could they be mobbed up with communists? Well, here's the secret. Communists are monopolists. And that's what he is. He was a monopolist. He wanted a monopoly on certain markets in the oil industry, energy industry. So they actually work good together. Now, I know I've kept you here a long time. If you want to dig into that assertion that this is about bankers, here's a 650-page book called The Creature from Jekyll Island, a second look at the Federal Reserve by G. Edward Griffin. This was written in 1994, and the John Birch Society did a lot of the research for this book. At the time, he worked for us, and he traveled all over the United States for the John Birch Society Speakers Bureau to give talks about his book. I hosted him in Provo and was the MC, and I introduced him to 600 people at Provo High School in Provo, Utah. It's 1995. And I thought that night, when I looked out at that crowd, boy, this does it. We're doing this all over the country. We're going to awaken America to a sense of their awful situation, and they're going to understand what's going on, and they're going to be alerted, and they're going to demand that we go back to constitutional monetary organization in this country and use the gold and silver coin as Article 1, Section 10 requires. And of course, that didn't happen. But by 2008, people woke up, and I was invited to come and speak to an End of Fed group in Salt Lake City. There was 150 people there. I held up this book and I said, how many of you have seen this book? They all raised their hands. I said, how many of you read it? About 2/3 of the hands went down. I said, well, 1/3 of you, that's pretty good. This is a long book, but I recommend it to you. It reads like a novel, but it's totally researched. How many of you know who published this book in 1994? Nobody raised their hands. And I said, the John Birch Society. So welcome to R5. We're the ones that started this movement to take a better, closer look at this long time banking entity. Let me look at my notes for a second. I'm getting down there, folks. I know I've kept you a long time. All right, let's just move forward. I'm not trying to do it up and cut. This is a book that we published back in 1948. It's missing a little bit here because my parent tore that off. I can't trust him around my books. but I love him. That's why I let him bite me clear through this lip, clear through this lip, clear through this hip. I still love him. I forgive him. Anyway, this is a great book, 265 pages, The Shadows of Power, the Council on Foreign Relations and the American Decline. This was written in 1988, so it covers the Council on Foreign Relations up till then. The CFR was formed in 1921. It's headquartered in New York. The Council on Foreign Relations is a globalist kind of policy think tank, about 4,000 members. If you go back through its history, you will find a lot of presidents and secretaries of state were members of the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, what did oh, there it is. If you can get one of these, even though this is kind of old now, 1996, you'll see that it lays out in it 1929 to 1933 and so on, all the way up to 1993 to 1996. And up at the top it says Secretary of State, so you know who was, it puts it in bold, who was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Edward Stepness, Dean Atchison, John Foster Dulles, Christian Herder, Dean Russ, William Rogers, Henry Kissinger, Edmund Muskie, Cyrus Vance, Alexander Haig, George Schultz, Warren Christopher, Madeleine Albright. You start recognizing the names, don't you? And so as you look at that and you see who was what, it lists all kinds of, let's look at presidents up until then. Who were members of it? Herbert Hoover was, Dwight Eisenhower was, Richard Nixon, James Carter, George H. Bush, George H.W. Bush, Herbert Walker Bush, and William Jefferson Clinton. Those presidents were all members of the Council on Foreign Relations. What a great coincidence. If they'd all been members of Gun Owners of America, we'd have probably never heard any end of it from the press. Wow, look at this. Gun Owners of America has taken over the White House. Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, CIA, so on and so on. That's all in here. So what about today? Well, we have a new book. This just came out. Yesterday, this became available for sale from shopjbs.org. We don't even have any copies here tonight to sell because it wasn't available for us, or we would have brought a case here for you guys to purchase or two. It's about $11 plus shipping. I want to recommend it to you. It's just a little over 300 pages. This will get into detail about the Council on Foreign Relations and their influence. Thanks for coming. I know some of you got to go, and if you have to leave, go ahead.
What's the title, Bliss?
This is called In the Shadows of the Deep State. So basically it's replacing this book because this was 1988. We've updated, written a new book in 2018. So, you know, it was time to put something out more up to date. So I really highly recommend this to you. Everyone I've talked to that's read it loves it. I can just go through here. There's just so much information that is so enlightening. Here's a quote in the middle of the book. This is where I am. I haven't read the whole book. I'm right here. Page 126. Once in a great while, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations would quit and state the intended purpose of the organization. One such individual was Admiral Chester Ward, who wrote, quote, "The main purpose of the Council on Foreign Relations is promoting the disarmament of the U.S. sovereignty and national independence and submergence into an all-powerful one-world government." That's one paragraph in 350 pages. So you can get a great deal out of this book. It's indexed and it's got a bibliography in it again. All right, let's move forward here. I mentioned this magazine earlier. This came out. We've got a few copies back there. They're $1 a piece. This is this year. So this is about the deep state. This is about the organizations that make up the deep state, so that you recognize them when you're watching the evening news, or when you're hearing a commentator and you're hearing somebody that's a speaker from the Council on Foreign Relations or the Trilateral Commission or one of the other organizations that are part of the milieu behind the deep state and government. It also, this reveals to you exactly the kind of infiltration of our government that's gone on over the decades to build a grip on our government. And I'm talking about our federal government. This is another magazine. This one came out in August. This is, if you couple these two magazines together, then you've got a really powerful little book. This one is called Deep State in Action. So this one tells you about the organizations. This one tells you about the actions that they take. Now, the John Birch Society, I mentioned, you know, there's a lot of things that we're trying to do to thwart this conspiracy for world domination that includes these deep staters and the international communists. And I can recommend some books to you to read, that kind of thing. Normally I would have prepared a handout to give you with a list of 20 books you could read on this. I'll recommend The Naked Capitalist by Dr. Cleon Skousen, The Naked Communist. I'll recommend to you the books I've said tonight, The Shadows of Power, and In the Shadows of the Deep State. But there's also a great little book called Inside the United Nations by Steve Bonta that I recommend. So, number one, what can be done? Learn the truth about the conspiracy that seeks to create a world government to rule over you. These two magazines will give you a good deal of that information. Join forces with others in an organized effort to expose the truth to others. If you know the truth can make you free. If Americans widely know the truth, they aren't going to be so easily deceived into voting the wrong people into, whether Republican or Democrat, okay? They won't be deceived into voting the wrong people into office. They won't be deceived into supporting things that are not good for them. For example, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement that's on the news right now, 1,809 pages. How many of you think President Trump's read that agreement? How many of you think any of our senators have read it, or our congressmen at all? Yeah. I've only met one man that's read the whole thing. His name's Scott N. Bradley. He's a PhD in constitutional law in North Logan, Utah. And he's put out a video right now warning Americans, don't let this pass. This will help destroy our sovereignty and our independence. It'll start the merger process of building a North American Union, merging Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And so don't let this pass.
It's about trade.
Well, they say it's about trade, yeah, and it does have to do with trade. But is it free trade? They'll say free trade. Well, free trade might take a couple of page agreement. This is 1,800 pages. That's managed trade, isn't it? And we could go on all night. That's another, but we may have one or two of these. This is a new reprint that we just put out this week. It just became available. It's got 3 articles in it. So I recommend that to you. I'm going to give you a copy because you're a legislator, so you ought to read it. That's the only copy I've got with me. So learn about the John Birch Society. Consider joining with us. We have 6 decades of information that we've assembled and compiled. We can help you see what's going on. We are not an organization that endorses candidates or political parties. So you don't have to worry about that. You could be a Democrat or a Republican or a member of the Libertarian Party or Constitution Party or Independent American Party. Come and join us anyway. What we are is constitutionalists. What we're trying to do is study the Constitution of the United States and apply it and enforce it. We don't need to change it. We need to get people to know about it. We need to get our government to comply with it and obey it and keep their oath of office that they took to it. This is to limit government. Here's unlimited government. This is the Charter of the United Nations. Isn't it funny? They look a little bit alike. Both fit in your pocket. I always feel like the Lord gives you something good and Satan comes along with the counterfeit. You know? And that's kind of the way it works out. So what we have an agenda, the John Birch Society. 10 things. They're listed in our agenda. Anybody can buy this. We are not a secret combination. We're not a conspiracy. We're wide open. Anybody can buy this for $1 from us. Just call up our headquarters. Hey, I'd like one of your agendas, and here's our whole agenda. So we're not trying to hide anything from anyone. There's 10 agenda items in here. They're all under Roman numeral. Recruiting, because if we don't grow, we can't win. If we don't.
Well, I wanted to thank you guys. I know it went a little bit longer than what we tried to do. We try to keep everything within 45 minutes, an hour, but you know, there's so much information. People are so used to 100 Twitter bites. I'm really hoping that there are a few Americans that care enough to be able to start going a little bit deeper and start realizing that reading is really something that we should be doing more often. And I'm saying that to myself as a guy that read his first book when he was 45, so I was a late bloomer for sure when it came to that kind of things. So I did want to thank you guys for coming. It is Christmas season. It's cold outside. Oh, sorry. And the magazines, there are some in the box. Please, you guys, I was given cases of the conspiracy magazines. If you want one, take one. If you want to leave a donation, please do it. It's the least I can do to be able to have you guys come. I am trying to get $1 for the deep state issues. If you guys want to know a little bit more about what we're doing, please sign up in the sign-up sheet in the back. Your email will be put on a list for legislative alerts. and some of the surprise campaigns that we have going on. And also the events that we have. Hopefully we'll begin to have them a little bit more often. If you want my email information, for those of you that have smartphones, if you want my information, I would ask you to do me a favor right now, is to pull your cell phone out and text the word Tom to 88588. And what it'll do is it'll give you my email address, our website, and that kind of a thing, should you desire to contact me for some reason. If not, you can find my mug on the website of jbs.org. Also, our current event, current items, for those that you don't know, Article 5 has been a fight that we've been fighting for 35 years. Mark Meckler and the Convention of the States, and we'll be back again this year. We need all hands on deck on this issue. We beat it down. It seems like we beat it down more efficiently every single year. If you guys want more information, I will bury you with the information. USMCA is absolutely huge. It's not talked about in the media at all. We've got a full expose that I can give you. If you're interested in that, just email me and let me know what you want. We've got an immigration issue in case nobody's paying attention to that. Some invaders that are trying to welcome their way through the border. And we've got a huge campaign that we're going to be launching about getting the UN, like we did when we first started. The one thing I'm most passionate about is our local police campaign. I've been visiting very diligently, crafting relationships that I can't even tell you how great they are. We've been visiting with high-ranking officials for the Idaho State Police. We've been visiting with the Sheriff's Association. The John Birch Society, you know, the ones that are labeled all these things, have just been invited to be permanent members for the Idaho Sheriff's Association.
Yes.
The next thing is that we're looking. Also, a friend of mine that just became a police chief of a local of a town has also invited us to be able to attend the Idaho Peace Officers Association. So we've got a three-pronged attack against or in support of law enforcement. We want to keep them local, we want to keep them independent, and we want to be able to have them understand what kind of people we really are and about how we differ from some of the people that are less like us, let's say. And so we're going to be at the gun show on January 12th and 13th. I think that's at the Idaho Center. We have a banner that one of the members created that says the John Birch Society, we've been right all along. So if you want to come and show up at that, that'd be awesome. We've got a lot of surprise campaigns come up. If you want to know more information, please talk to me. If I can get you any information on any topic we have, I'm available. So thank you for your time again, and sorry I took so long.
No, you didn't.
Okay, with the owner of this hat, please come forward. Steve Gagan, hold this while Bonnie picks it on.